The Duval Rundown is brought to you by Injury Care Centers. Same-day injury care, no ER lines. Now here's your host, Gus Logue.
Good afternoon and welcome to episode 36 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined by college football expert Matt Hayes, who co-hosts XL Primetime on 1010XL. He also does a college football kickoff show. He's also the senior college football writer at USA Today Sports. So I thought this would be a good time to bring Matt on to talk a little bit about the future and what the biggest needs are for Jacksonville on its roster and what that means for the 2025 NFL draft. Because although the Jaguars aren't slated to have the first overall pick anymore, I think that honor goes to the New York Giants now. They are still slated to have a top 3 pick and will most likely end up with the top 10 pick, regardless of how the season ends up unfolding. But first, as we do it in every show, we're going to start with a little bit of Jaguars trivia. The Jaguars are the only NFL team to have never played on Thanksgiving Day. Which AFC South franchise has played the most Thanksgiving games? Is it the Texans, the Colts, or the Titans? You got a guess, Matt?
Gus, I'm going to go with – so is it the Titans / Oilers or just the Titans?
Yes.
I'm going to go with the Titans /
Oilers. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I try to make sure to frame it by franchise and not by team because you're right. It is the Titans franchise, which used to be the Houston Oilers. And so technically Houston has the most Thanksgiving games of any AFC South city. But yeah, with the franchise with the most Turkey Day appearances is the Tennessee Titans / Houston Oilers. So congrats, Matt. You got that one right. I think probably only Mia really has named trivia questions. But we're not here to talk about Thanksgiving Day or the NFL really for the rest of the season since the Jaguars are sitting at 2-9. They have a very slim chance of making the playoffs. And so now our attention is focused to the future, and especially with this being the bye week. And so, Matt, before we do get to the future, I want to start by taking a look in the rearview mirror and asking you, what do you think the biggest positional need was for the Jaguars entering this season? And do you still feel the same way now that we're a little more than halfway through the year?
So, Gus, I made the point many times on XLP and was roundly made fun of when I did this. But I would joke around and say guard. And first 2 picks of the draft should be guard because the interior of your line is terrible. I thought Jackson Powers-Johnson would have been a great pick because not the first round pick, but maybe trade back in and get him if you can late in the first round or early in the second round. Because then you've got not only a guy that can play guard, but a guy that once you're done with Mitch Morse, that experiment, he shifts over and can play center for you. And their middle 3 is a huge problem. Was last year, has been this year. I love the pick of Brian Thompson. I think Brian Thompson's going to be a terrific player in the league. I just think at that point, they needed to protect the guy they just put $75 million into. And they didn't do that. And I still think it's their biggest weakness. I still think moving forward. Now it's not just the middle 3. Now I think, you might have problems on the outside too. I think they'll be okay with Anton Harrison and even Walker Little on the left side at tackle, but they've got to do something inside. They have to. And if that means drafting someone, like Emory Jones from LSU and moving him inside later in the first round or drafting Will Campbell and forcing him to play left tackle, and then you got to figure out what you're doing once again with Walker Little. I don't know, but they need help on that offensive line right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Going into the season, I would have said it was probably depth either in the cornerback room or the defensive line, just because obviously after Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen, and then after Tyson Campbell really in the secondary, there's not really a lot of bodies. And this goes for a lot of position groups, but I feel like on defense especially, like your groups are only as good as your weakest link. It's not really about how many stars you can collect. It's about just how good the depth of that group is. And so they definitely need to improve their depth at a lot of groups, whether it's those 2 spots on the defense, but especially on the offensive line as a whole. I'm right there with you, Matt, where I think even if I thought defense was a bigger need entering the season, now with where we're at with the team sitting at 2-9, Trevor Lawrence is battling another injury. I think you definitely got to protect the face of the franchise. But after offensive line, what do you think would be the next 2 position groups to round it into like a top 3 positional needs entering this coming offseason?
I actually think it's clear. I think it's edge and I think it's corner. If you look at edge, Gus, it's unreal. If you go beyond Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen, the next guy with the most sacks for them was a guy they traded 7 weeks ago. Roy Robinson Harris, who has 2.
Yeah.
That's you cannot have that on an NFL roster. That cannot be what you have. That goes directly to poor drafting and poor decisions in free agency. And it's just, to me, I think that there's been so many problems in this whole year and then the end of last month and a half of last year. And I think that right there is a microcosm of just how poorly they've developed this roster. The one guy outside your 2 ends who leads you in sacks is a guy you traded 7 weeks ago. It's remarkable, actually. So I would say defensive end clearly and corner. They need another corner. I mean, you cannot get away in this age of football. I don't care if it's college or the NFL without 2 strong cornerbacks, because it's a vertical passing league now, and you've got to be able to cover. You got to be able to cover in man. And I think Tyson Campbell can be that guy if he can stay healthy. If he can stay healthy, I think you got to get another corner too. But the first thing I would do if I'm the Jags in this draft or in this free agency is I've got to protect my investment. You may not like Trevor Lawrence, you being the global you. You may not like Trevor Lawrence. You may not think he's a generational quarterback or whatever tag you want to put on him. But they've invested the money. That's the guy. He's their guy now, like it or not. So You've got to do everything you can to put pieces around him to make his transition to reach his ceiling as easy as it can be. And right now, honestly, Gus, from the time he stepped on the field here, they've done nothing but make it difficult for him to reach his ceiling.
Yeah, the Brian Thomas pick was definitely a breath of fresh air, because since the start of his career in 2021, he hasn't really had a true vertical threat that could take advantage of the arm that he has and really space up the offense. So now it's nice that Brian Thomas Jr. is here, but obviously the offensive scheme isn't really doing as much as they could or should be doing in order to facilitate him touches and really just expand the offense and continue to adapting it against modern defenses. And so it's kind of a stubborn approach by the offensive coaches there, I think. And then I agree with you about the defensive line point, where I think it was a stubborn approach by Trent Baalke to go into this season with really only Hines Allen and Walker as your 2 true edges, and then to trade away Travis Gibson before the season even starts is kind of inexplicable, because he was supposed to be your 3rd edge entering the year, and instead they had the whole Eric Armstead experiment, which hasn't worked out at all, where has triple the pressure rate as an inside rusher as he does an outside rusher, and he can hold up on the edge on early downs because he is really good at playing against the run and containing runs and stuff like that. But on late downs, you definitely need some more juice behind Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker. And so to bring it into the conversation about the 2025 NFL draft and its top prospects, I thought it'd be interesting just to go through the first dozen or so names that's listed on typical big boards, just to get a feel for who these prospects are, especially for someone like me who is very invested in the NFL, but only really has a casual understanding of college football and its best players. And so starting out with Travis Hunter.
Yes, real quick, before we go any further. Yeah. I think since you brought up the draft and analyzing these guys, think about this. If we're talking about the offense and defensive line, the lines of scrimmage, which is where football is won at any level. I don't care if you're talking about Lakeshore or Pop Warner. Football is won on the line of scrimmage. That's their 2 biggest issues right now.
Yep.
That's this guy who has built this team. The 2 biggest issues are the 2 most important things in the football playing world. That's where this franchise is right now. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that actually is a perfect point with what I talked about with Coach Campbell on the last edition of this show, where we agreed that just trenches on both sides of the ball were the biggest issue with this roster. That's where they need to improve going forward. And obviously it'll be a little bit interesting what their strategy is for the drafts, because they do have free agency before the draft. So they will be able to have the opportunity to plug in some holes. Like offensive line is definitely at the top of the list, but hypothetically they could franchise tag or extend Walker Little. And all of a sudden that's not nearly as big of a need. But yeah, me and Coach Campbell are right there with you, especially when you look around like other good teams in the NFL, the way that the Lions and the Eagles and the Ravens are dominating the trenches and just like able to will themselves, especially in the run game, has been pretty remarkable and something that we haven't seen in Jacksonville for a long time. But yeah, to get to the NFL draft, again, the Jaguars' positional needs could shift by the time we do get to late April. But what do you think about Travis Hunter? What makes him so special, just to, again, casual fans like me who might not be tuning into college football each Saturday?
I think it's rare athleticism, obviously. It's the ability to make plays, obviously. But I love the fact that he loves football. You can tell he loves football. And he's also a guy who wants to win. Like, it bothers him when they lose. It bothered him last year when they won 4 games. It's bothering him now that they've given up their direct path to the Big 12 championship game. I love guys like that. I love guys that want to compete and that guys that are really upset about losing. I think this franchise needs more guys in that roster that are upset about losing.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There was a really cool clip from the Giants offseason Hard Knocks last year when Malik Neighbors took a meeting at the NFL Combine with the Giants and Coach Brian Dable. And Dable asked him, how do you respond to losing? And Neighbors said, not well at all. And Dable said, yeah, me too. And so it was a really cool clip because I think, Dable is on the same page as you, where we need more guys like that in the league in general, but especially here in Jacksonville. So I think you nailed it, where it's not just a special athlete, but special love for the game and special mindset to go along with all the physical attributes for sure. And so Will Johnson is the next cornerback listed at 6 overall in typical big boards. But I think there's some people out there. Actually, first, before we get to Will Johnson, I just wanted to ask you one more thing about Hunter. He does play wide receiver and cornerback at Colorado, but I think most people are assuming that he's going to be a corner in the NFL. He has said, though, that he wants to play both positions. And so I think a lot of people are kind of saying maybe he'll probably be a cornerback and maybe they'll offenses will work in certain packages for him. But how do you see it playing out for him? Do you think he's just a cornerback or what?
So I clearly think he's an elite cornerback, but I also think this guy is just scratching the surface as a receiver. And if he's smart and his agent is smart, he's going to say, I want to play receiver, because the money is at wide receiver. The money's not there's good money at corner, but the real money is at receiver. And if he truly believes he has that kind of ability, and if you watch him play, man, I'll tell you what, Colorado's best play, honestly, is find Travis Hunter and throw the ball to him no matter where he is, because he'll go get it. And he's shown the ability to high point balls. He's shown the ability to run behind secondaries. He's shown the ability to go over the middle and make a catch, a tough catch, and his explosion after the catch. I'm telling you right now, Gus, I would not be shocked at all if after the season's over, we get to like mid to late January, and all of a sudden you start to hear Travis Hunter say, yeah, I want to play receiver. I don't want to play corner.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, he can control his future a little better at receiver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's not just the kind of player who wants to touch the ball more, but needs to. Like, the problem with cornerbacks is like someone like even Tyson Campbell is like a great player, but sometimes you don't even recognize it because opposing offenses know it, and so they're going to throw the ball and even run the ball in opposite direction. So he's not really going to be involved in the game that much, or you're not going to at least see him in the game that much. But it'll be the opposite if Hunter does play receiver. So that makes a lot of sense. It'll be interesting to see what that storyline ends up becoming as we get closer to the real draft season. But to move the conversation to Will Johnson, he's drawn comps to Patrick Surtain as just like a do everything, checks all the boxes type of cornerback prospect out of Penn State. I think some people even say he might be a better pure cornerback prospect than Travis Hunter. So what would you say to that, and what do you think about Will Johnson in general?
I mean, they're similar type player, but Will's a more physical player, I think. Will's a guy that I think is going to be a guy that's going to stick his nose in there and run support, and he's very good in man coverage. So, I mean, he's a prototypical corner. I still think if you look at Travis Hunter, he's not the biggest dude. His frame needs to fill out a little bit.
He's definitely
I think Will Johnson is a fully developed. That's a dude. He's going to walk in the field, and you're going to be like, okay, yeah. Like you see Tyson Campbell, you walk in the field, you're like, yeah, that dude's a fully grown dude. He's ready to go.
That's an
day one, ready to go. Yeah, and I think Will Johnson's like that.
Okay, absolutely. That'll definitely be, I think, a great situation for Jacksonville. Obviously, we all agree that the trenches is their biggest priority entering the offseason, but maybe if they shore up those areas of weakness in the NFL draft or in NFL free agency in March, then they'll be in position to take the biggest non-trenches position of need, which is cornerback, and be able to finally get a long-term running mate with Tyson Campbell would be a really nice fit. The next players up on big boards are typically quarterbacks: Shadur Sanders from Colorado, Cameron Ward from Miami, Jalen Milroe from Alabama. So we don't have to spend too much time on them since, obviously, as you said, whether fans like it or not, Trevor Lawrence is a long-term guy in Jacksonville. But Ted McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona, seems like
Phenomenal.
a surefire top 5 pick.
Yeah.
The comp that he gets a lot of comparisons to is Mike Evans, who is almost similar to what you were just saying, where it's like he's a dude and like he's just going to walk into the NFL and instantly belong. Is that what you kind of get the feel of?
Yeah,
Gus,
he's not a guy that's going to get you with burning speed, but man, he does everything else perfect. And he's one of those long dudes that's got a great catch radius. He's a guy that obviously high points the ball. I mean, you watched him, and they first off, I think Noah Fafita is a really good quarterback at Arizona, but he makes Noah Fafita look like an All-American sometimes. And I expect him to be a guy that will walk in wherever he goes and to be a guy that's going to get 60, 65 catches year one, 900, 1,000, 1,100 yards, 8 to 10 touchdowns. He's going to be an immediate impact guy. And then from there, get better and better. He's got an NFL body. He's got the temperament. He's another one of those guys that loves the game. And that is just crazy. You watch him on game day, man, he is all kinds of excitable. And it's not like, crazy kind of excitable. I'm in the moment right now.
That would undoubtedly be an awesome trio if the Jags ended up having Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., and Ted McMillan. I think anyone would like to see McMillan and Teal, who lives in Jacksonville. But do you think that would almost be like an over allocation of resources to take a receiver in the first round in back-to-back years, and they should maybe focus on other positions? Or do you think
I'll ask you. So okay. It's probably the easiest way to say it is, what's the guard free agency pool look like? And I'm not sure it's that deep.
Probably
but
not.
Number 2, at some point, and I hate to say this, but at some point, they've got to start drafting on the offensive line and having these guys for long deals that aren't too expensive. And Shad Khan said that over and over too. It's time to stop spending money. They're paying a right guard right now all kinds of money to be average at best. He's not even average anymore. So, and they just paid $30 million to a left guard who, again, is an average player, is a guy. He's literally just a guy, Ezra Cleveland. So I think it's at some point you've got to start drafting guys that are really good college players that you can develop and that you can have on the cheap. And that's why I was screaming from the rooftops about Cooper Beebe, who's going to be an all-rookie team guy with the Cowboys, now center for the Cowboys. He could have played center or guard. And it's guys like that. It's guys like that you grow with, that develop, that become these anchors on your offensive line. And it's so important, man. I mean, Gus, you saw what they did with the second round. But where's Mason Smith? What has he done all season? You literally wasted a top 50 pick on a guy like that. That's terrible. That's terrible work by your front office.
I think it's a good point that they need to not only draft offensive linemen, but also retain them, where obviously Cam Robinson was just traded a few weeks ago. He was a longtime left tackle, but the situation was murky because the Jags drafted Walker Little and then just never really gave him the shot to play until very recently. And so now we'll see with Walker Little whether he ends up becoming the long-term guy in Jacksonville or if they get someone else to be the blindside protector. Maybe even Anton Harrison moves over to the other side. I think a lot of people in the media are projecting that to happen as soon as next year. But yeah, to move the conversation to that position group in this NFL draft class, what do you think about Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks? It seems like they're good or great, but not elite top 3 type picks at offensive tackle. Do you think that they both could potentially move inside to guard?
I think Kelvin Banks can. I don't think Will Campbell's a guard. I think if you're talking about left tackles, I think Will Campbell's here and Kelvin Banks is here.
Okay.
I really like Will Campbell because he's long and I think he's really athletic. He's got good feet, and I think he can put on some weight. I think he's still got a little room to grow as far as physical. Kelvin Banks is kind of tapped out right now. It doesn't mean that's bad. I'm just saying that's what I think. I think Will could be like a legit force on the edge if coached properly. So I think if you get him here, the hope is you've got a new staff and a new offensive line coach and somebody that can develop him into, an elite left tackle that he could be, because I wouldn't mind that pick at all. I think that would be a smart pick.
So when you say he needs good coaching, do you just mean that he's a very athletic prospect and is still a little bit raw in terms of technical details?
No. I mean, he needs to not come in here and have Phil Roush as his offensive line coach as well.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you hate to say that, but we've watched this now. We've watched this offensive line for 2 years now, and I understand. I agree that at some point players have to make plays, but these guys are not. You're seeing dumb penalties, reach. You're seeing these reach hold penalties. You're seeing false starts. You can't have stuff like that. That stuff's got to be coached better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like we haven't really seen any development from anyone on the offensive line, right? Like they bring in a lot of guys like Mitch Morse, and even an Ezra Cleveland was a veteran with Minnesota. Obviously, Brandon Sheriff spent a long time in the league before coming to Jacksonville. So they just kind of been plugging in guys to just make it work rather than actually growing and developing the unit. So I think that's totally a fair point. The last position group, we'll just put defensive line and edge rushers together. Mason Graham from Michigan is considered a top 5 pick. And let's see, Abdul Carter from Penn State, the edge player, is considered a top 8-ish pick. What do you like about those two players?
I mean, both guys obviously available if you trade down, which is smart. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't know that I think if you're going to get an edge guy, you've got to get a quick edge guy like an Abdul Carter, like a Jalen Walker, and you got to get somebody like that. That's a quick guy. That may not be a big guy, a 265, 270, 200. What's Trayvon now? 280, 275, 280. Like I don't think you need a guy like that. I think you need a guy like a 250 guy off the edge that you can bring in on third down and just wreak havoc. And I think that's an Abdul Carter. That's a Jalen Walker. Again, it all depends on what scheme you're running too, because who knows what they're going to run. I mean, if it's an odd front, then you've got a chance to do some different things. And if you're sticking at the even front, how many reps is that guy going to get? He's going to get a lot of pass rush reps. Mm-hmm. But Jalen Walker's not he's not going to play linebacker. I think Abdul Carter can play linebacker. I don't think Jalen Walker is going to be like a NFL even front linebacker guy. He's going to be a rush end guy.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see how that develops just based on what Jacksonville's coaching staff looks like. They did transition from a 3-4 to a 4-3 this season under Ryan Nielsen. But yeah, we'll just have to see what the 2025 defensive coordinator / head coach / general manager wants to do on defense, especially at the edge.
/ personnel director / college director, right?
Yeah. Yes. Is there any names that I have not mentioned that you think could like maybe sneak into the top 10, or that you think are particularly good fits for Jacksonville, or do you think we kind of went over all of the big fish?
I like the other LSU offensive tackle too, Emory Jones. I think he's a good player. I think you might be able to get him late in the first round. But again, I don't know if you're secure with what you have at tackle, that's fine, and you move from there and you figure out the interior. I look at like Anton Harrison, and I think he'll be I think we all think he's going to be a good player. But has he improved this year, or has he kind of just stayed where he was, or maybe even regressed a little bit? That's the big question. And that's why I go back to coaching, Gus, honestly. I mean, I think if you've got a talent like that, clearly that guy last year was a guy who was like, okay, this dude gets it. Mm-hmm. A lot like Jawan Taylor his first year. And then he regressed a little bit. So I don't think they could be at the point where these guys are regressing under them. I think you've got to develop guys, and they've got to continue to develop and not take steps back. And that's my big concern about that.
Totally. My last prospect question is just a quick random one, because the Jaguars shouldn't even come close to considering taking a running back in the first round, considering they already have Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby under contracts through the 2025 season. But Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State, looks just absolutely incredible. So what do you think of him, especially in comparison to like recent first round picks like Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson? Do you think he's in that class?
Yeah, I think he's certainly, you could easily make a case that he's in that class. Now, he's a smaller guy. He's probably, he told me he was, I said, Ashton, how tall are you? Like 5'8", and he laughed and he goes 5'9" on a good day, man. So he's a short guy. He weighs about 205, but he's got this rare ability, the balance that he has, and the ability to get to run with power and run over you, as well as he's got that wiggle too. Yeah, it's you watch that dude, and he's got it. There's no doubt about it. And he's got that breakaway speed too.
All right. So to round it all up, just who would be like the top 3 names?
That's my alarm going off right now, by the way, that I've got a call I got to get on. Go ahead, Gus. I'm sorry.
All right. So this will be the last question. What just 3 names? Who would be your 3 favorite names to see selected by the Jaguars come April?
I mean, I would start with Will Campbell. That would be the first guy I'd start with. And I don't know that I would even, you know what? I don't want to get into the 1, 2, 3. I just want to zero in on one guy. If you're at that top with the first pick, or if you can trade down to get the second or third pick, and you know that Will Campbell will be there, and you can get a pick 10 through 16 or whatever it is, don't be ridiculous. Do the smart thing and do what you need to do to help your franchise, and more importantly, to help the guy you just paid $275 million to.
All right, you heard it here. Don't be ridiculous. All right, now let's go. Appreciate you so much for coming on. I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure all the listeners learned a lot too. So hopefully we'll have you back on at some point. But thanks again. Take care.
Okay, Gus. My pleasure, man.
All righty. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes to see if we have any questions in chat therapy. And then also just to preview Jaguars versus Texans a little bit, because we are not going to have a Thursday show because I forgot that Thursday is Thanksgiving. So happy Turkey Day in advance to everyone. Hope everyone's able to spend some time with their families, spend some time recharging, spend some time eating good food, watching bad football, etc. The Thanksgiving NFL slate is pretty gross. And the Black Friday game is Chiefs, Raiders. Like, I'm going to watch it, but I'm not going to be that excited about it. I don't know. But the Jaguars do play on Sunday. They host the reeling Texans, who are 7-5 and in first place in the AFC South, but they've lost a handful of ugly games over the past month or so, including last week against the Titans. And so it's interesting because obviously the Jaguars are like vastly underwhelming compared to expectations entering the season, but so are the Texans. And so this is kind of like a needed get right spot for both teams, where obviously even if the Jaguars are out of playoff contention, it's still kind of a get right spot for them just to kind of keep vibes alive and just keep the ship moving, and like just end the season on at least somewhat of a positive note, because it would just be, again, like not very good momentum to have going into next season if you just lose out. And so I think the Jaguars are going to be well rested and ready to come out and give Houston every piece of themselves, especially after they were embarrassed in a home game against Houston last year. I think it was week 3 when their fullback returned a touchdown on a kick return. And so I think the Jags will be inspired, and obviously the Texans will be inspired to hold their first place in the AFC South and reach the playoffs for the second year under CJ Stroud. And so I think it'll be a dogfight. I think it'll be a close game. I am assuming that Trevor Lawrence is going to be playing just based on what Doug Peterson has said. Like, I feel like he's been pretty optimistic at press conferences, but even not listening to Peterson in press conferences, because he might not always be telling the truth necessarily. Not a Doug thing, but just any coach standing up at a presser isn't always telling the truth, especially about player injuries. But Doug seemed pretty optimistic, and Trevor is definitely the type of player who wants to be out there no matter what. And so Trevor did also practice yesterday on Monday. And so I would expect him to play, which makes me think that it will be a kind of close, gritty game. Robert Lamison added on YouTube that Jalen Petre, when I say it, it doesn't sound right, but I think that is how you say his name. Jalen Petre is out for the Texans, which is pretty big time because he's not a megastar in the way that Will Anderson or Daniil Hunter might be, but he's an lights-out safety for them. Came out of Baylor a couple of years ago. He's an awesome player and a lot of fun to watch, and he's one of the most aggressive guys and like biggest tone setters on that defense, I guess, just with the physicality that he plays with. And so that's going to be a big miss for Houston. Houston has its bye week next week, and so I think they're going to be like the opposite of Jacksonville, where obviously they still are going to be motivated to win, but they're just like so banged up. They've just had to like get through a rough patch of the season where they're just kind of like fighting to stay above 500. And then the Jags are, even if it's like a lost season, they're still going to be playing to win, and they're going to be rejuvenated from the bye. And so again, with that, like the rest advantage for Jacksonville in mind, home field advantage, the assumption that Trevor Lawrence is going to come back, I think that Jacksonville will cover the current 5.5 spread. I don't know about them winning outright, just because I have so much more faith in Texans coaching staff over Jacksonville's, even if the Texans have kind of underwhelmed this season. So I think that the Texans will be able to close out the game, but yeah, I think it'll be close. Pat Man asked on Facebook, do you think it would be a bad idea to fire Balky and keep Doug with someone manning GM with the same vision as Doug? Yes, I think it would be a bad idea. I get what you're saying, where you're saying Balky is the problem, so fire him and get someone who's aligned with Doug to carry out Doug's vision. And so that makes sense as a question, but I just don't really have any faith in Doug's vision, because we just talked with Matt about how the offensive line hasn't really developed or progressed or gotten better in recent years under Phil Rauscher. And I think you could say the same thing about every position group, especially wide receivers, but really the offense as a large. Like, Peterson had some great stuff in his playbook a few years ago when they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl with Nick Foles, but they just haven't adapted well enough at all. And I think that sometimes they have the right idea of how to adapt. Like, I talked about this with Mia multiple times, I think, where like, oh yeah, like we want to get more under center run game, more power and gap runs in our run game to adjust for how modern defenses are playing. But like, it's one thing to have that idea, especially since everyone else in the league or most other teams have the same idea, but it's another thing to actually execute it in the same way that, again, the Lions and the Ravens and the Eagles and all of these juggernauts are executing it. And so, yeah, again, I think it's a fair and understandable question, but no, I would not fire Balky and keep Doug and try to carry out his vision. The Jaguars definitely need to clean house. And so it looks like we're going to have to wait around until January for that to happen, but that is the expectation. Robert asked earlier on YouTube, any thoughts on Tyler Booker? No, I don't even know who that is. I assume it's a college guy. I'm sorry I didn't see this earlier when Matt was on. But, yeah, I'm sure we'll have Matt on for sure after the season as we kind of ramp up into draft season after the NFL regular season and just season as a whole ends. We'll definitely get Matt back on, talk more about college prospects. But in the meantime, we will be back next Tuesday at 9:04 to break down whatever we saw from Jaguars versus Texans. And then me will be back on a Thursday show, and we'll be back doing Sunday post-game shows. So stick with us. I'm sure we'll have plenty of things to talk about, even if the playoffs are no longer in sight. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I thought Matt was a great guest. Yeah. All right. I'll catch you guys. Have a good Thanksgiving, everyone.
The Duval Rundown has been brought to you by Injury Care Centers. Your path to recovery starts here.